The screams pierced the summer air like broken glass. Children's voices, high and panicked, mixed with the violent hiss of water shooting from sprinkler heads at full pressure. Blankets flew through the air, books scattered across wet grass, and small bodies scrambled in every direction as the peaceful afternoon exploded into chaos. 30 minutes earlier, Maple Grove Park had been a sanctuary of quiet contentment. The ancient oak trees cast cool shadows over the reading circle, where 12 children, aged 7 to 10, had gathered for their post-lunch rest period. It was Tuesday, the third week of the Maple Grove Summer Reading Camp, a program designed specifically for children who struggled with traditional physical activities. These kids, all carrying extra weight that made playground games challenging, had found solace in stories and friendship under the canopy of leaves. Marcus Williams, 8 years old with gentle brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, lay on his stomach reading a chapter book about dragons. His inhaler rested beside him on the red plaid blanket his grandmother had packed that morning. "This dragon sounds just like my asthma," he had whispered to his friend Emma earlier, pointing to a passage about the creature's labored breathing. "But he still saves everyone." Emma Martinez, 9 and fiercely protective of her reading circle friends, had organized the blankets in a neat circle. Her dark hair was pulled back in twin braids, and she wore a t-shirt declaring, "Books are my superpower," in bold purple letters. She'd been the one to suggest they move their rest time outdoors when the library's air conditioning had broken the previous week. "Mrs. Patterson said we could have quiet time anywhere, as long as we stayed together," Emma had announced, leading the group to their favorite spot beneath the oaks. The children had claimed this corner of the park as their own, far from the tennis courts where the adults played their competitive matches, away from the playground where younger children shrieked with endless energy. The reading camp had become a lifeline for these children and their families. Started by the community center 3 summers ago, it provided a safe space for kids who didn't fit the traditional mold of summer athletics. Instead of dodgeball and relay races, they had book discussions and creative writing. Instead of being picked last for teams, they were celebrated for their imagination and insight. Sarah Chen, the camp director, had watched her students flourish in ways their school teachers hadn't thought possible. "These children aren't lazy or unmotivated," she had told the community center board just last month. "They're just different learners who need different spaces to shine." On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the children had spread their blankets in a loose circle, some reading silently, others dozing in the dappled sunlight. The park maintenance crew was working on the far side of the field, their mowers creating a distant, rhythmic hum. A few joggers passed by on the paved path, nodding politely at the peaceful scene. That's when Karen Hendricks arrived. Karen served as the Homeowners Association representative for the Maple Ridge subdivision that bordered the park. At 52, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who had appointed herself guardian of community standards. Her silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a navy blue blazer despite the 80-degree heat. A clipboard clutched against her chest served as both shield and weapon in her daily battles against what she perceived as neighborhood decay. She had been making her weekly inspection of the park when she spotted the children, her lips pressed into a thin line as she observed the scene. To Karen, the sight of these children lying on blankets during what should be active outdoor time represented everything wrong with modern parenting. In her mind, they were lazy, undisciplined, and worst of all, they made the park look like a homeless encampment. "Excuse me," Karen's voice cut across the peaceful afternoon as she marched toward the reading circle. "This area is designated for active recreation, not loitering." Emma looked up from her book, shading her eyes with one hand. "We're not loitering, ma'am. We're having reading time." Reading time belongs in a library, not sprawled across public grass like vagrants. Karen's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You're clogging up the field and making this park look lazy and unhealthy." The word unhealthy hung in the air like a slap. Several children looked down at their bodies. Suddenly self-conscious about their size, Marcus felt his chest tighten, though whether from emotion or asthma. He couldn't tell. "Our teacher said we could read here." 10-year-old David spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. He was the shyest member of the group, and speaking to adults required all his courage. "I don't care what your teacher said. I'm telling you to move. Now!" Karen's clipboard jabbed toward the community center building. "Take your little slumber party inside where it belongs." Emma stood up, her small frame rigid with indignation. "We have permission to be here. You can't make us leave." Karen's eyes narrowed. In her worldview, children who talked back represented a fundamental breakdown in social order. These particular children, with their obvious weight issues and defiant attitudes, embodied everything she felt was wrong with permissive modern parenting. "Watch me," she said, pulling out her phone and walking toward the maintenance shed. The children watched nervously as Karen disappeared around the corner of the building. Emma tried to maintain her brave front, but uncertainty crept into her voice. "She can't really make us leave. Can she?" Marcus had closed his book and was sitting up now, his breathing slightly labored from anxiety. "Maybe we should just go inside," he suggested quietly. "I don't want to get in trouble." "We're not doing anything wrong," Emma insisted, but her voice wavered. The peaceful afternoon had been shattered by Karen's harsh words, and the children's safe space suddenly felt precarious. 5 minutes later, Karen reappeared, walking with purpose toward the irrigation control panel mounted on the side of the maintenance building. She had discovered that the afternoon sprinkler cycle for this section of the park had been disabled for maintenance. With a few quick adjustments to the timer system, she could remedy that oversight. "Last chance to move voluntarily," she called out to the children, her hand hovering over the control switch. The children looked at each other uncertainly. They had every right to be there. But something in Karen's tone promised consequences they weren't prepared to face. Emma made the decision for all of them. "We're staying. You're just trying to scare us." Karen's smile was cold as winter steel. "Am I?" She flipped the switch. The sprinkler system erupted to life with a mechanical grinding sound, followed by the whoosh of high-pressure water. The irrigation heads, designed to cover the entire field area, sent powerful streams of water shooting in rotating arcs across the grass. The children, sitting directly in the coverage zone, were instantly soaked. The blankets were drenched within seconds. Books that had been carefully bookmarked were suddenly waterlogged. Personal belongings scattered as the children leaped to their feet, shouting in shock and confusion. "My book!" cried Jessica, a quiet girl who had been reading her first chapter book without pictures. "I can't see," David yelled, his glasses streaming with water as he stumbled blindly across the slippery grass. But it was Marcus who faced the greatest danger. The shock of the cold water combined with his mounting anxiety triggered an asthma attack. His breathing became rapid and shallow, his chest constricting as he struggled to draw air into his lungs. The inhaler that had been resting safely beside him on the blanket was now somewhere in the chaos of scattered belongings and flowing water. "I can't breathe," he gasped, but his voice was lost in the commotion. Karen stood at the irrigation controls, her phone held high, recording the scene with obvious satisfaction. To her, this was justice being served. These lazy children were finally being forced to move, to run, to engage in the kind of physical activity that might actually benefit their health. "There we go," she called out over the sound of the sprinklers, her voice bright with vindictive pleasure. Now you're getting some exercise. This is what parks are for." She zoomed in with her phone camera, capturing the children's panicked faces as they slipped and stumbled on the wet grass. In her mind, she was documenting evidence of successful community enforcement. She imagined sharing the video at the next HOA meeting as an example of how to handle problem situations. Emma, despite being soaked and shivering, spotted Marcus bent over near the oak tree, his face pale and his breathing labored. "Marcus needs help," she screamed. But the adults, who might have heard, were too far away, and Karen was too busy filming to pay attention. The 9-year-old girl made a decision that would later be called heroic by the local newspaper. Instead of running to safety, like the other children, she fought her way back through the sprinkler streams to reach Marcus. The water pressure was strong enough to knock over a small child, and Emma had to lean forward and push against the flow to make progress. "Where's your inhaler?" she shouted over the noise of the sprinklers. Marcus pointed weakly toward the scattered blankets. Emma dove into the soaked pile of fabric and belongings, searching frantically for the small plastic device that could save her friend's life. Her hands were shaking from cold and adrenaline as she threw aside wet books and clothing. Finally, her fingers closed around the inhaler. She rushed back to Marcus, who was now sitting on the ground, his lips taking on a bluish tinge that Emma recognized from health class as a sign of serious breathing problems. "Here, use this," she said, pressing the inhaler into his hands. Marcus fumbled with the device, his coordination compromised by lack of oxygen. Emma had to help him position it correctly and press down on the plunger. The medication began to work almost immediately, but Marcus was far from recovered. Meanwhile, Karen continued her recording, completely oblivious to the medical emergency unfolding just 50 yards away. She was too focused on her video to notice that one child wasn't running with the others, that a little girl was trying to provide medical assistance to a boy who was clearly in distress. "This is perfect," she muttered to herself, adjusting her phone angle to capture what she perceived as comedy gold. "Finally getting these lazy kids moving. Their parents should thank me." The other children had reached the safety of the community center, their clothes dripping and their dignity shattered. They burst through the doors, creating puddles on the linoleum floor as they shouted for help. "Mrs. Patterson! Mrs. Patterson! Someone turned on the sprinklers while we were reading." Sarah Chen emerged from her office, immediately taking in the scene of 10 soaked, traumatized children. Her protective instincts kicked into overdrive. "Where are Emma and Marcus?" Still outside, Marcus couldn't breathe, and Emma went to help him. David's words tumbled over each other in his urgency. Sarah ran outside, her heart pounding with fear for her students. She could see the sprinklers still running at full pressure, and 2 small figures huddled together under the oak tree. Without hesitation, she plunged into the spray, using her body to shield the children as she reached them. Marcus was breathing more easily, thanks to his inhaler, but he was still pale and shaken. Emma was soaked to the skin, her teeth chattering from cold and shock, but she refused to leave her friend's side. "Come on, let's get you both inside," Sarah said, helping Marcus to his feet while keeping one arm around Emma's shoulders. As they made their way toward the building, Sarah spotted Karen still standing by the irrigation controls, phone in hand, a satisfied smile on her face. The sight of an adult deliberately tormenting children sent a surge of rage through the normally composed educator. "Turn off those sprinklers right now." Sarah's voice carried the full authority of her position and her fury. Karen looked up from her phone with mild surprise. "Oh, hello there. Just helping these children get some proper exercise. They were cluttering up the field with their sleeping bags and whatnot. They were having supervised reading time, and one of them has asthma. You could have killed him." Sarah's voice rose with each word. Karen's smile faltered slightly. Well, I'm sure it's nothing serious. Children are resilient. A little water never hurt anyone. Turn! Off! The sprinklers! Now! Sarah's words were ice cold and sharp as razors. Reluctantly, Karen flipped the switch, and the park fell silent, except for the dripping of water from tree branches and the distant sound of traffic. The sudden quiet felt almost as jarring as the initial chaos had been. You haven't heard the last of this, Sarah said, helping the children toward the building. I'm calling the police, the park department, and every parent of every child you just terrorized. Karen watched them go, her confidence beginning to waver for the first time. But she quickly rallied, reminding herself that she had been enforcing legitimate community standards. These children had been loitering, and she had taken appropriate action to encourage them to use the park properly. She had no idea that one of the children she had just drenched and traumatized was Marcus Williams, the mayor's youngest son. Mayor Tom Williams was in the middle of a city council budget meeting when his phone buzzed with an urgent call from Sarah Chen. He almost didn't answer, but something about seeing the community center's number during the day when Marcus should be at camp made him excuse himself from the meeting. Mr. Williams, this is Sarah Chen from the reading camp. Marcus is okay, but there's been an incident. The mayor's blood turned to ice water. What kind of incident is he hurt? A woman from the Homeowners Association deliberately turned on the park sprinklers while the children were having quiet reading time. Marcus had an asthma attack from the shock and stress. He's stable now, but I think you should come pick him up. Mayor Williams was already reaching for his car keys. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Is he breathing okay? Yes. Emma helped him use his inhaler, and he's much better now. But Tom, this wasn't an accident. This woman filmed the whole thing. She was laughing while your son couldn't breathe. The mayor had been in politics long enough to control his emotions in public, but this was his child. His hands shook as he started his car. Save everything. Don't let anyone touch anything until I get there. When Mayor Williams arrived at the community center, he found Marcus wrapped in a towel, sipping hot chocolate that one of the staff had made. His son looked small and vulnerable, his usually bright eyes dulled by the afternoon's trauma. Hey, buddy, the mayor said softly, kneeling down to Marcus's eye level. How are you feeling? I'm okay, Dad. But she was really mean. She said we were lazy and unhealthy. Marcus's voice was steady, but there were tears in his eyes. Emma saved me. She found my inhaler when I couldn't breathe. Mayor Williams looked over at Emma, who was sitting nearby, still in her damp clothes, but refusing to go home until she knew Marcus was all right. Thank you, Emma. You're a real hero. The little girl blushed and looked down at her hands. Marcus would have done the same for me. Sarah Chen pulled the mayor aside and showed him the security footage from the community center's outdoor cameras. The video clearly showed Karen approaching the children, arguing with them, then deliberately activating the sprinkler system while filming their panicked response. She recorded the whole thing on her phone. Sarah said grimly, she was enjoying it. Tom, she was enjoying watching children run in terror. Mayor Williams watched the footage twice, his jaw tightening with each viewing. As a father, he wanted to find Karen and give her a piece of his mind. As a public official, he knew he had to handle this through proper channels. As a human being, he was horrified that someone could treat children so cruelly. Do we know who she is? Karen Hendricks. She's the HOA representative for Maple Ridge. She's been causing problems at the park for months, but nothing like this. The mayor nodded grimly. He knew Karen by reputation. She was the type of person who called City Hall to complain about children playing too loudly, or neighbors whose grass was half an inch too tall. But this crossed every line of human decency. "I'm calling the police," he said simply. Detective Maria Santos arrived at the community center within an hour. Accompanied by a child services specialist trained in interviewing young witnesses. The detective had handled many cases involving adult misconduct, but deliberately endangering children always struck her as particularly heinous. The children were interviewed one by one in a gentle, age-appropriate manner. Each told the same story the mean lady had told them: they were clogging up the park, that they looked lazy and unhealthy, and then she had turned on the sprinklers while filming them with her phone. Emma, despite being the youngest witness, provided the most detailed account. She was smiling when she turned on the water, the 9-year-old told Detective Santos. She was happy that we were scared, and she kept filming even when Marcus couldn't breathe. Detective Santos reviewed the community center's security footage and made copies for evidence. The video clearly showed Karen's deliberate actions and her obvious enjoyment of the children's distress. Combined with the children's testimony, it painted a picture of calculated cruelty. "This is definitely criminal behavior," Detective Santos told Mayor Williams. "Reckless endangerment at a minimum, possibly assault. The fact that she targeted children specifically makes it worse." Meanwhile, Karen had returned home, completely unaware of the storm gathering around her. She uploaded her video to her personal social media account with the caption, "Finally got those lazy kids moving at Maple Grove Park. Sometimes tough love is what children need to learn proper behavior. Parents these days are too soft. Shush community standards. Tough love. Kids need exercise." She tagged several local community groups and the Homeowners Association, proud of what she considered a successful intervention. In her mind, she had performed a public service by forcing inactive children to engage in physical activity. The video began circulating within hours, but not in the way Karen had expected. Instead of praise for her community enforcement, she began receiving comments expressing horror and outrage. Parents, teachers, and community members shared the video with captions calling for Karen's prosecution. By evening, the story had reached local news outlets. Channel 7's investigative team contacted the mayor's office for comment, and Mayor Williams knew he had to make a public statement. Standing at the podium in City Hall, with Marcus by his side, Mayor Williams addressed the cameras and the growing crowd of concerned citizens. His voice was steady, but those who knew him could see the controlled anger in his eyes. "This afternoon, a woman named Karen Hendricks deliberately endangered a group of children at Maple Grove Park." He began. "These children were participating in a supervised reading program, harming no one. When Ms. Hendricks decided they didn't belong in a public park." He paused, looking down at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "She turned on high-pressure sprinklers while children were sitting directly in the water's path. She filmed their panic for her own entertainment. One of those children, my son Marcus, suffered an asthma attack that could have been fatal without the heroic actions of his friend Emma Martinez." The crowd murmured angrily at this revelation. Several parents hugged their own children a little tighter. "But this isn't just about my son," the mayor continued. "This is about 12 children who were targeted because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of how kids should look or behave. This is about adults who think they have the right to terrorize children to enforce their personal prejudices." He held up his phone, showing Karen's social media post. Ms. Hendricks posted her video online, proud of what she had done. She called it "tough love" and said parents today are too soft. "I call it child abuse, and I'm pressing charges." The crowd erupted in applause. Mayor Williams waited for quiet before continuing. But more than that, we need to examine how we treat all children in our community. The reading camp exists because some kids don't thrive in traditional athletic programs. They're not lazy or unhealthy. They're just different. And they deserve to feel safe in public spaces. Marcus stepped forward to the microphone, his small voice carrying clearly through the speakers. Emma saved my life today. She could have run away like the others, but she came back for me. That's what real heroes do. The crowd's response was immediate and emotional. Several people wiped away tears as the 8-year-old boy continued. The mean lady said we were lazy, but we weren't. We were reading and learning and being good friends. That's not lazy. That's important too. By the time Karen saw the news coverage that evening, it was too late to control the narrative. The story had spread across social media platforms, with her video being shared thousands of times alongside screenshots of her social media post. The comment section was a torrent of outrage, with people calling for her arrest, her job, and her expulsion from the community. Karen's phone began ringing constantly with calls from reporters, but she quickly stopped answering when she realized they weren't calling to congratulate her on her community service. The HOA received dozens of angry calls demanding her removal from any position of authority. The next morning, Detective Santos arrived at Karen's door with an arrest warrant. Karen answered in her bathrobe, hair disheveled, clearly having had a sleepless night as the full implications of her actions began to sink in. Karen Hendricks, you're under arrest for reckless endangerment and assault, Detective Santos said, reading from the warrant. You have the right to remain silent. This is ridiculous, Karen protested as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. I was enforcing park rules. Those children were loitering. You endangered the life of a child with asthma. Detective Santos replied calmly. Your intentions don't matter when a kid can't breathe. The perp walk was captured by local news cameras, and Karen's mugshot would soon become a symbol of adult bullying and abuse of authority. Her neighbors watched from their windows as she was loaded into the police car, many of them shaking their heads in disgust. The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Karen's own video evidence made the prosecution's case straightforward. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she had been enforcing legitimate park rules, but the video clearly showed her enjoying the children's distress and continuing to film even when it became apparent that one child was in medical crisis. During the preliminary hearing, the judge watched Karen's video in stunned silence. When it finished, she looked directly at Karen over her glasses. Ms. Hendricks, I've been on this bench for 15 years, and I've rarely seen such callous disregard for child welfare. Your actions were not only illegal, but morally reprehensible. The case never went to trial, faced with overwhelming evidence and public outrage. Karen accepted a plea bargain. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service working with children's charities, and mandatory anger management counseling. She was also ordered to pay restitution for the damaged books and belongings of the reading camp children. But the legal consequences were only the beginning of Karen's reckoning. The Homeowners Association voted unanimously to remove her from her position and ban her from any future community roles. Several of her neighbors who had witnessed her behavior over the years came forward with their own stories of Karen's harassment and intimidation tactics. The story gained national attention when it was picked up by major news networks and viral social media accounts. Karen's video became a case study in adult bullying and the harmful effects of fat phobia on children. Child psychologists used it as an example of how adult prejudices could traumatize young people and create lasting emotional damage. Karen found herself unemployable in her field of community management. Her reputation was permanently damaged, and she eventually had to move to another state to escape the constant recognition and condemnation from strangers. Meanwhile, the reading camp children were healing with the support of their families and community. Marcus returned to camp after a few days, his confidence gradually restored by the overwhelming support he received. Emma was recognized by the city council as a community hero for her brave actions in helping her friend during his medical emergency. The reading camp itself underwent significant changes in the wake of the incident. Donations poured in from across the country, allowing the program to expand and serve more children. New security measures were implemented to prevent similar incidents, and the park department created specific policies protecting supervised children's activities from interference. Sarah Chen used the attention to advocate for greater understanding of diverse learning styles and the importance of inclusive recreational programs. Every child deserves to feel safe and valued in public spaces, she said in interviews. What happened to our kids was traumatic, but their resilience and friendship has been truly inspiring. 6 months later, Maple Grove Park hosted its first annual Reading Under the Stars event, where hundreds of children and families gathered to celebrate literacy and community support. Marcus and Emma were invited to read the opening story together, their friendship having become a symbol of courage and loyalty. As Marcus stood at the microphone that evening, looking out at the crowd of supportive faces, he thought about how much had changed since that terrible Tuesday afternoon. The park felt safe again, filled with families who understood that children came in all shapes and sizes, all with their own gifts to offer. Books taught us that heroes come in all different forms, Marcus said, his voice strong and clear. Sometimes heroes are dragons who save kingdoms. Sometimes they're 9-year-old girls who won't leave a friend behind. And sometimes they're whole communities that stand up for what's right. The applause that followed seemed to echo across the park and into the surrounding neighborhood, a sound of hope and healing that proved how much stronger a community could be when it chose to protect its most vulnerable members rather than prey upon them. Karen Hendricks had set out to enforce her vision of community standards, but in the end, she had helped the community discover its true values: kindness, inclusion, and the fierce protection of childhood innocence. The children she had tried to shame and scatter had instead been embraced and celebrated, their differences recognized as strengths rather than flaws. As the families packed up their blankets that night, many of the same blankets that had been scattered by sprinklers 6 months earlier, the park felt transformed. It was no longer just a place where some activities were tolerated and others forbidden. It had become a true community space where every child could find their place, whether they were athletes or readers, extroverts or quiet observers, perfectly healthy or managing chronic conditions. The sprinklers still ran on their regular schedule, but now they watered flowers planted by the children in honor of their experience. The oak trees still provided shade for reading circles, but now they were surrounded by benches donated by community members who wanted to ensure that every child had a comfortable place to learn and grow. And somewhere in another state, Karen Hendricks watched the news coverage of the reading celebration with a mixture of regret and incomprehension. She had spent her court-ordered community service hours reading to children at homeless shelters, gradually beginning to understand the impact of her actions. But the full lesson of that summer day would take years to sink in. That true community strength comes not from enforcing conformity, but from protecting diversity, and that the adults who deserve respect are those who use their power to lift children up, not tear them down. The story of the sprinklers had become something much larger than one woman's cruel impulse. It had become a reminder that in every community, there are moments when people must choose between standing by or standing up, between enforcing their prejudices or expanding their hearts. Maple Grove had chosen wisely, and 12 children were safer, stronger, and more confident because of it. In the end, the water that had been meant to scatter them had instead watered the seeds of a more compassionate community, one where every child could rest safely under the trees, with a good book and the knowledge that they were valued exactly as they were.